Now for our roundtable with Mary Anna Mancuso, a Republican political strategist and author of PoliticalHype.com, a blog that is aimed at conservative millennials, and News Channel 5 political analyst Brian Crowley, author of the CrowleyPoliticalReport.com. So last week, Governor Rick Scott did what everyone expected. He announced that he's going to be running for the Senate against Bill Nelson. And let's play a little bit about what he said about taking on the incumbent Democrat.
Washington's a disaster. It's dysfunctional. There's a lot of old tired thinking up there. It's not heading in the right direction. Now, here's what we shouldn't be doing. You know, we shouldn't be sending the same type of people to Washington. We should say, we're going to make change.
Is this a new message, and what is your take on it?
It was a new message in about 1840 when it first came out, but no, there's nothing new about his message. I don't know which old, tired Washingtonians he's talking about, the Republican majority in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, who's been there forever. I mean, it was sort of, in some ways, it was an odd but very typical, you know, Washington is a bad place, I can't wait to get there.
The swamp.
Yeah,
kind of comment that we've
but
heard
it's
before.
But it's, you know, it wasn't very creative on his part. But then Rick Scott's not a very politically, he's not that creative.
What's your take on it?
I think it was unique. We saw that Rick Scott was trying to really thread the needle and speak to people that were fed up with what's not happening in D.C., as well as people that are diehard Trump supporters, and he was really walking that fine line. One of the things that I had hoped is that he would come out swinging at Nelson and really push Nelson into what is the problem within D.C. Let's face it, the only thing that Nelson has done his entire time in Congress and the Senate has been to go to space, and then he sat on his hands and watched the space program flounder here in Florida.
He talked about how you didn't really understand who the tired Washingtonians are. Who do you think he's referring to?
I'm sure he's referring indirectly to Bill Nelson, as well as other Democrats in D.C. that are kind of holding things up, and some of the Republicans that are not getting things done. I mean, when you go to the Senate, you are among the elite of the elected officials in D.C., and your job is to get things done. And it's time that they start doing things and working together, and Rick Scott wants to go to the Senate and help them move legislation forward.
Well, the fact of the matter is, if Rick Scott were to win, and this is not picking on Rick Scott, but anybody who was to win that seat, if they were Republican, even assuming they keep the majority, if you go up there as a freshman Republican in the Senate, you have about as much clout in the Senate as I do. It's just the nature of the Senate. It's very based on seniority, and
you believe that even as a governor coming
yeah,
in?
I mean, we've seen that over and over again.
Right.
You know, people that are governors go to the Senate, and they don't necessarily have more clout than any other senator there, and they certainly don't have as much clout as the leadership. It's not like he's going to go up there and suddenly become a chairman of a committee. And he's not the kind of charismatic figure that knows how to grab, you know, the media and be on all the Sunday talk shows on a regular basis. And that's usually the only other path you have to have any kind of a clout, and that's just not his nature. So, you know, if he wins, he's not going to necessarily accomplish more than Republicans think that Bill Nelson has accomplished in the last 18 years.
How do you see this race playing out over days and months to come? Are the messages shifting at all, or do you think this is what we're going to hear?
I think we're going to hear a lot of this. I think that also this will be a very close race. We know that Rick Scott in his past 2 elections has narrowly won victory to the governor's mansion, and this is time for him to really kind of step up his game and look for other outlets, whether it's through social media, a stronger grassroots game. We're really going to have to watch Rick Scott in terms of beefing up things. People know who he is. Now it's time to get them to fall in love with him and send him to D.C.
Do you think that the hurricane played into that, people knowing who he is?
I don't think the hurricane hurt him. I think he was able to demonstrate that in this time of an emergency, he knew how to get things done. I mean, nobody's perfect in those kinds of events. It was his first time having to deal with a major natural event like that. And I think most people give him fairly high marks for the way he handled all that. Does it make a difference in the election? Probably not. You know, his approval numbers have always been, you know, on the lower end of approval ratings, and he really hasn't gotten out of that by very much. So, I mean, I don't expect that come November, people are going to suddenly discover a new Rick Scott that they didn't know for the last 8 years.
Switching gears a bit and talking about President Trump, who's expected to be just down south on Monday talking about tax cuts. And do you do either one of you believe that the tax cuts have had the impact with Republicans and voters that they had hoped?
Well, let's let the Republican go first.
I think when it comes to the tax cuts, corporations have obviously seen a little bit of a reprieve, and they've trickled that down to some of their employees. When it comes to individuals, they may have seen a quick bump right after it was passed, but really they're not going to feel the effects of this until 2019 when they start filing for their taxes from 18. And right now, when we look at some of the evidence anecdotally, we understand that that is showing a reprieve and people are enjoying the benefits of the Republican tax cut.
You know, one of the interesting things about tax cuts is that while a tax cut can be helpful to an individual or a family, you know, one of the uncontrollables is, like using Florida as an example, you know, if you lower property taxes, but at the same time your homeowner's insurance goes up and the cost of a lot of other things go up, or individual districts, you know, raise their taxes, sometimes you still don't have a net gain within the tax, so you don't really feel like you've gotten the kind of money you need to buy other things that you might want to buy or invest or save, because you're still going to increased expenses for other items that you have to have.
Do you think there's even a real understanding yet about how the tax cuts may benefit people? I mean, I've had many people say, I don't know if this is good or bad. I really don't know. I don't understand.
Well, you know, the interesting change, you know, especially within the Republican Party, which for decades was horrified by the notion of huge deficits and said it would bring the country to ruin. Most economists see a $1 trillion deficit that's already underway coming in this. Some Republicans are very upset with the dramatic increase in deficit spending. And eventually that will catch up to us unless we have an enormously improving economy, and nobody's predicting that right now.
Let's touch base on a huge topic in the news this week. Former FBI Director James Comey beginning his book tour and launching really huge criticisms at the president who fired him. Does this have an impact on voters, or is this a storyline that stays in the news for a few months and moves on? You each have your opinion, I'm sure.
I would say that this is something that is just a blip on the radar. It's going to speak to people that are already fed up with the Trump administration, and people that are in support of Donald Trump will just say, oh, he's a liar. However, what's interesting is in the social media space, people are really criticizing him from the GOP standpoint. They're criticizing Comey. And that strikes me as a bit kind of precarious. Normally, if somebody is not credible, you don't try to discredit them. You ignore them, you stay in your lane, you don't swerve. And people are really giving him a lot of airtime by saying all these really horrible things. But one thing to keep in mind, if we look back historically with Watergate, the tapes, once they were found out, they were not the silver bullet. It took months to actually bring down the administration. So Comey's book is not going to be the silver bullet that ruins the Trump administration right the minute it hits the shelf.
The president addressing it directly on Twitter as well with strong words.
Yes, he called Comey a slime ball, which I think is another historic first for the White House. I don't know that we've ever had a president that made a public statement like that about any individual. You know, I think Comey's, having only seen excerpts and parts of his interviews, you know, it sounds like Comey went a little astray in talking about personal things about Donald Trump.
Appearance and...
yeah, his appearances and his tan and stuff like that, rather than sticking with the issues that, you know, ultimately led to his firing. So, you know, I think what he did was he gave his opponents the opportunity to point to all the personal stuff that Comey got into, focus on that, and say that, you know, Comey's being disrespectful and rude, and it limits the discussion about the other facts that he has in his book. And although I don't think there was any smoking gun in the book, I think most of it was stuff everybody already knew.
Okay, we will be back with much more in just a minute.